Hi, comrades. I'm all sure we agree that was a great and inspiring video to celebrate Fidel's life and Fidel's impact across the world. And I'm going to carry that on. On the international world stage, Fidel was a figure larger than life. Quite a feat for a bearded giant of 6 feet 3 inches. At the UN, he would not be silenced, as we saw in the video, speaking truth to power, often for hours on end, draping a handkerchief over the lights on the podium that indicated his time was up. His speeches were and are now world renowned for their quality and their political importance. It was not only his words, but deeds that made an impact. It would take hours to recount all of Fidel's actions internationally, but we have the duty here of recounting some of the events that would be criminal to overlook. When in New York for the UN conferences, he would visit Harlem and the Bronx, finding solitude there, where revolutionary politics were being spoken about. In the famous 10 days he spent there in 1960, he met Malcolm X, Khrushchev, Allen Ginsberg, and Gamal Abdel Nasser. Meeting Malcolm X and being in the largely black area of Harlem, Fidel effectively made common cause with the radical black movement in the US. He came to the US hoping to highlight the racial inequality, and he expressed his admiration for the resilience of African Americans. As mentioned by Maria, Cuba is known for its health for internationalism, which has been woven into the ideals of the Cuban Revolution from the early days. In 1960, there was an earthquake in Chile. Fidel and the Cuban government sent a brigade of doctors. And then in 1963, during the liberation war of Algeria from French colonialism, the new government asked for assistance. Fidel explained the situation. Most of the doctors in Algeria were French, and many have left the country. There are 4 million more Algerians than Cubans, and colonialism has left them with many diseases. But they have only a third of the doctors we have. That's why I told the students that we needed 50 doctors to volunteer to go to Algeria. Since this first brigade and the one in Chile, over 600,000 Cuban medical professionals have worked in around the 170 countries. Cuba sent more doctors than the World Health Organization to West Africa to fight Ebola in 2014. And Cuba even sent doctors to Italy to fight against COVID-19 when the rest of Europe had turned its back. Fidel would have been proud. Fidel was committed to international political solidarity for movements fighting back against imperialism. Significant now more than ever is the relationship between Cuba and Palestine. Since the revolution in Cuba, the government has always stood in solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. As part of the revolutionary government's first overseas solidarity mission in June 1959, Che Guevara visited Gaza. Soon after, Cuba began granting citizenship to stranded Palestinian refugees and giving Palestinian students scholarships. After the 1973 Arab-Israeli War, Cuba cut off all diplomatic ties with Israel and has never restored them. Fidel said on Palestine, the Palestinian movement have shown their ability to resist imperialist aggression. The Palestinian cause will prevail sooner or later, in spite of the betrayal by Arab reactionaries, imperialist maneuvers, and Israeli aggression. Meanwhile, Cuba's commitment to African liberation extended beyond healthcare. In 1965, Che Guevara and a brigade of Cubans went to Congo to fight alongside rebels defending the ideas of recently assassinated Patrice Lumumba. Cuba sent 25,000 troops to Angola in 1975 at the request of the newly independent state to fight against the invasions of South Africa and US-backed forces. The Battle of Quito Cuanavale in Angola in 1988 was a turning point in the defeat of South Africa's apartheid regime. Some 450,000 Cubans, military personnel and civilians, went to Angola over 16 years. It is no coincidence that the first country that Nelson Mandela visited outside of the African continent was Cuba. Mandela Mandela reflected upon his meeting with Fidel. What other country can point to a record of greater selflessness than Cuba has displayed in its relations to Africa? Explaining the importance of these acts of solidarity to the Cuban people, Fidel exclaimed, "The imperialists seek to prevent us from aiding our Angolan brothers, but African blood flows freely through our veins. Many of our ancestors came as slaves from Africa to this land. They fought as members of the Liberating Army of Cuba. We're brothers and sisters of the people of Africa, and we are ready to fight on their behalf. Racial discrimination existed in our country. Is there anyone who doesn't recall that African descendants were barred from many places, from recreation centres and schools? Racial discrimination was prevalent in all aspects of work and study. And today, who are the representatives? The symbols of the most hateful and inhuman form of racial discrimination, the South African fascists and racists. And Yankee imperialism has launched South African mercenary troops in an attempt to crush Angola's independence. In keeping with the duties rooted in our principles, our ideology, our convictions, and our very own blood, we shall defend Angola and Africa. Cuba's actions were not motivated by land, by profit, or by investment. They were motivated by morality. As Amilcar Cabral, the great African leader from Guinea-Bissau, commented, "When the Cuban soldiers go home, all they will take with them are the remains of their dead comrades." Fidel also made common cause with the great leader of the Land of Upright Men, Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso. Very quickly after Thomas Sankara established his revolutionary government in 1983, he signed accords with Cuba for scientific, economic, and technical collaboration. Cuba sent doctors to Burkina Faso and provided material support and assistance for the development of agriculture, socialist economic planning, animal husbandry, education, and the building of a dam. The following year, in 1984, Thomas Sankara traveled to Cuba to meet President Fidel Castro, receiving the José Martí Award, the highest honor that the Cuban Revolution bestows. Upon receiving the award, Sankara declared, "Cuba and Burkina Faso are so far and yet so near, so different and yet so similar. The only revolutionaries can understand the sincere love that pushes us irresistibly toward one another." Fidel and Sankara took a struggle against the unrepayable debt enforced on former colonies by the imperialist countries to the world stage. Fidel launching a campaign against debt repayments in Latin America, and Sankara taking the fight to the African continent, directly challenging the International Monetary Fund, world banks, and other tools of financial enslavement. Fidel quipped, "They blame me for saying that the debt cannot be paid. They should blame Pythagoras, Archimedes, Pascal, or Loyaczewski, or any ancient, present, or modern mathematician you prefer. Mathematics and mathematicians' theories are the ones which demonstrate that the debt cannot be paid." The collection of this debt, the unjust system of economic relations, is the most flagrant and brutal violation of human rights that one could ever imagine. In 1960, we said, with the sale of 1 ton of coffee, 37.3 tons of fertilizer could be brought. In 1982, with the same amount of coffee, only 15.8 tons of fertilizer could be obtained. We, the third world countries, usually export coffee, cocoa, and other goods and import fertilizer from the developed world's chemical industry. Fertilizers are needed to produce coffee, corn, or wheat. However, each time we have to hand in more coffee to obtain less fertilizer. And they say they do not want hunger to exist. This analysis led him to make one of his most profound and shortest international speeches ever, linking global debt repayment to the climate crisis, felt most keenly by the poorest countries. At the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio, Fidel warned about the imminent threat, not only to Cuba, but to the world, arguing, an important biological species is in danger of disappearing due to the fast and progressive destruction of its natural living conditions, humankind. Fidel listed the climate crimes the old colonial powers have committed, the pollution, the deforestation, and the exploitation. When Fidel was speaking over 30 years ago, the extent to which capitalism would drive the climate crisis beyond breaking point had not yet been revealed. Despite this, he already had the solution. Advocating for socialism, stating, save mankind from this self-destruction, we have to better distribute the wealth and the technologies available in the world. Let human life become more rational. Let us implement a just international economic order. Let us use all the science necessary for pollution-free, sustained development. Let us pay the ecological debt and not the foreign debt. Let hunger disappear and not mankind. At 76 years old, he concluded, tomorrow it will be too late to do what we should have done a long time ago. Before we move to discussion, it would not be permissible to reflect on Fidel's life without talking about his contribution to Latin America's regional integration and the relationship he developed with another giant of Latin American politics, Venezuela's Hugo Chavez, who had launched a military uprising in 1992 against the bloodthirsty government of Andres Perez. The uprising was defeated, but only, as Chavez put it in a TV appearance, for Por Ahora, for now, which has become a slogan for social change. Under popular pressure, like Fidel, Chavez was eventually released in 1994 and invited to Havana by Fidel, who saw in him revolutionary potential for Venezuela. Chavez won a landslide election in 1998 and began a crucial collaboration with Cuba that has shaped the region ever since. In 2020, in 2000, the leaders signed an accord in which Chavez agreed to provide Cuba with 53,000 barrels of oil a day at preferential price. In exchange, Fidel sent 20,000 medical professionals and educators to create a free healthcare system for the working class and poor in Venezuela. In 2000, Chavez was targeted by a coup. 2002, Fidel played a crucial role in defeating it, calling Chavez while he was being held by the coup plotters, advising him, do not quit, don't resign, contrasting his situation with the tragic suicide of Chile's Salvador Allende. Cuba's foreign minister flew to Caracas to prepare a rescue, and Fidel used his influence to rally international support and popular mobilization against the coup. Fidel got the word out to loyal Venezuelans that Chavez had not quit. They mobilized in their thousands, coming down from the hillsides to surround the presidential palace. Chavez was returned to power by rank and file soldiers who disobeyed orders. The collaboration continued. In 2004, Cuba and Venezuela founded ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance for Latin America, pledging to develop regional integration and trade on the principles of solidarity, mutual assistance, and, and complementary economic planning. With Cuba and Venezuela at the helm, ALBA has run literacy programs, treated over 7 million cataract patients, created a regional bank, provided subsidized oil in return for goods and services. The founding of ALBA represented a beacon of hope and solidarity against a backdrop in that period of imperialist war in Iraq and Afghanistan, the kidnapping and overthrow of Haiti's popular president, and the intensification of US-backed civil war in Colombia. Fidel reflected on his words on Latin America integration decades earlier. If we want to save the freedom of each of our societies, which after all are part of a great society, which is the society of Latin America, if we want to save the revolution of Cuba, the revolution of Venezuela, and the revolution of all countries of our continent, we have to come together and we have to support each other solidly, because alone and divided, we will fail. So to close, what can the life and ideas of Fidel Castro teach us here in imperialist Britain? How can we use his words to guide the struggle for revolution here, in the gloomiest of societies, where reaction is rising and revolutionary political consciousness is at such a low ebb? Fidel reminds us, a revolution is not a bed of roses. A revolution is a struggle between the future and the past. It is our duty to keep alight the flame that Fidel carried, the flame that he passed on to revolutionary struggles across the globe.